Christopher West, location, my own house. Australian identity is produced through Australian rock music. Australia has had a tough time forging a national identity in a globalised world. So much of what seems to make up being Australian are often hand-me-downs from British society and the cultures that have made up the multicultural Australia that we live in. So what does it mean to be Australian, and how do we define ourselves in a way that separates us from our colonial past? Well, I think if you look closely at the music that has come out of Australia, particularly since the 1980s, you'll find that Australia has truly found its voice and wants to sing aloud on the global stage. After building up a comprehensive playlist of Australian rock tunes over the years, I decided to look for any common threads between the bands, the lyrical content, and to a deeper level, the Australian sound. What I found was that despite the differences between such a vast array of bands and artists, there seemed to be three elements, in my opinion, that linked all these bands together in a way that made them uniquely Australian. For me, these three features were an element of anti-authoritarianism, a social conscience, and a notion of place in which the music was created. To me, it was a combination of these three elements that made up the Australian sound, and it was through that sound that I think we portray the truest version of Australian identity to the world around us. Anti-authoritarianism. Australia has had a long history of anti-authoritarianism, and that stems right back to its colonial roots. Always living in the shadow of British culture, Australia quite literally likes to give the middle finger to anyone or anything that tells us how to do things. This becomes clearer when you look at some of the figures in Australian folklore that most embody being Australian. For example, Ned Kelly is arguably the most famous figure in Australian mythology, and he was literally a murderer and thief. Yet we even used bushrangers as the name of state sports teams. What was it that we liked about these outlaws? Well, Ned Kelly and his counterparts have remained relevant in Australian society for more than 125 years because they embody the rebellious, anti-authoritarian, and larrikin qualities that we feel make up our national identity. This directly translates into our Australian music. If we look now at the song Prisoner of Society by The Living End, the chorus is literally, "We don't need no one to tell us what to do." And you can see pretty quickly why a song like this would have struck such a chord with the people of Australia and would have remained such an enduring hit around the country. An element of social conscience. Another element of Australian music I found to be quite important was that of a social conscience. Australian bands have historically used their art as a platform to highlight social issues in our society, whether they are political in nature or other. The most famous occurrence of this was during the closing ceremony of the 2000 Olympics held in Sydney, when Midnight Oil took stage wearing black outfits with the word "sorry" printed across them. This relates to the then Prime Minister John Howard, who had stated he would not apologise for past government's actions in relation to the treatment of Indigenous Australians since British invasion. The band were given a global stage to perform to an estimated 4 billion viewers, and took this as an opportunity to propel an issue that had already been raised earlier in the Olympics by Cathy Freeman to a worldwide discussion. Place. The final aspect I think contributes to Australian musical identity is the relevance of the place in which the music was created. It is no secret that Australia has some of the most breathtaking landscapes in the world, and it would be foolish to pretend that these didn't have any impact on the music that was being produced. Throughout Australian rock music, there are countless references to the dry, dusty plains, the unbearable heat, and even the humidity that make up the Australian landscape. The John Butler Trio famously named their breakout album in 2004, Sunrise Over Sea. This was a reference to the sun rising over the beaches of Byron Bay, where the album was created. This frames the album, and one can quite easily visualise the sweeping waves of the radiant sun flowing off the water throughout the album. In conclusion, when we want to see which traits a culture values, it is often best to look at the music it was created. It is my firmly held belief that these values encapsulate what it means to be Australian, both musically and non-musically. While we may have had a tough time verbalising what we as a society value, we have subconsciously painted a clear picture for the whole world to see.